You mentioned hegemonic influences or hegemony. So for people who like haven't read Foucault and like don't know what the structure of structures is, like how would you describe hegemony?
To me, when I look at it, it's like how it is a structure that's completely dominated by a particular group, not just group of people, but how they think, how they act. So one of the examples that I use when I go out and I'm talking to like various music ed students at different universities, I talk about, believe it or not, the Lord of the Rings, the Shire. And I promise you it's going to make sense. But, for those of us who have seen the Lord of the Rings or the Hobbit, when we think about the Shire, just imagine that place. Imagine the people, imagine the sort of interactions that take place, the buildings, the shapes, the knobs of the doors, the height of the homes. That space was built with a certain people in mind.
Mm-hmm.
And not just with them in mind so that they can be successful in that space. Well, if you recall I forget which sequel it was, but Gandalf, which was the Grey Wizard, he comes to visit Bilbo, and Bilbo has the ring. Well, Bilbo lives in a home in the Shire, and once Gandalf enters into his home, what happens? Gandalf is trying to situate himself in that very small space. Why? Because it wasn't built with him in mind.
Right.
He's walking through, he busts his head on the ceiling and the chandelier, and he's trying to, get some sort of sense of where he is and how to negotiate it. To me, that's what it is. Not only was it created with a certain people in mind by the individuals themselves, but it is maintained in a way so that those individuals alone solely will benefit and be successful. Anyone else outside of that, it's not built for you. And so I think that's the trouble with education. When we look at our music programs, whether they be K through 12 or undergraduate or graduate degree programs, all of these things were built with a particular group of people in mind.
Right.
It's funny, people like, I wonder why, certain students just can't make it in here. And I want to raise my hand every time and say, duh, because this was built for people like you.
Right. And so for like computer science people, an example of this, it's talked about in relation to like algorithmic bias. So hegemony, like in terms of facial recognition, designed by white people for white people, works for white people, but then as soon as like a black person uses facial recognition technology, the success rate drops to like the teens or 10% in terms of like how well it can work. Or even just like little stuff like being able to turn on and off like a water faucet using infrared technology. Like those were all designed for certain kinds of peoples and excluded others, either intentionally or unintentionally, through the bias in the algorithm.
It's funny you're talking about that in terms of technology and computers. I just started reading this book that Adrian Dixon suggested. It's called Race After Technology, Abolitionist Tools for the New Jim Code. It's by Ruha Benjamin. I just started reading that. It's a fascinating book. And it's talking about how these various sorts of computers and software and social media, it's crazy. I'm always into reading stuff outside of music ed because it forces me or anybody else to think about what we're doing in a much broader, more creative way.
This excerpt of the CSK8 podcast is from episode number 43, which is titled The Shire as Metaphor for Systemic Racism with Joyce McCall. You can listen to the full episode as well as hundreds more by searching for the CSK8 podcast on your favorite podcast app or by going to jaredoleary.com.